You're watching Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Shona Bhattacharya. Thanks so much for tuning in. Let's take a look at our top stories in this edition. A second day of massive protests in Togo. Thousands of people demanded President Faure Gnassingbé step down immediately instead of modifying the constitution to allow him 2 more terms in office to prolong his tenure. Understanding the pull of extremist groups in Africa. A study by the UN Development Program looks at the factors that incite young people to join organizations like Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab. They include poverty, marginalisation, and low education levels. And in South Africa, every day, 150 women report they've been raped. But only a small fraction of those accusations end in a conviction. Women accuse South African police of being insensitive and slow. They're the biggest demonstrations yet against Faure Gnassingbe's regime. Thousands of people took to the streets for a second day in Togo, with most of them in Lomé, the capital. Protesters were met with a heavy security presence at major intersections and were blocked from heading to the presidential palace. They demanded the president step down. He and his father before him have run the country for a total of half a century. Shirley Sitbon has the story.
Togo's opposition has rarely united. This week, it came together twice. Protesters called to limit the number of presidential mandates to 2. The current president, Faure Gnassingbé, is on his 3rd mandate, and his father ruled over the country for almost 40 years.
The constitutional reform is important for our children, our little brothers, my friends, and everyone in Togo. Enough is enough.
If he doesn't carry out the reform, he'll jeopardize our youth's future. In that case, he should just leave, or we'll march on the presidential palace.
Hoping to defuse the crisis, authorities have pushed their own constitutional reform. But for the opposition, the offer comes too late.
We don't want to waste any more time with their political maneuvers. We want to get to the point, discuss when and how Faure Gnassingbé steps down.
Stepping down isn't on the president's agenda. His allies say his departure will lead to chaos.
Doesn't the president have people backing him in this country? On August 29th, hundreds of thousands marched for him.
The opposition says it will return to central Lomé as many times as necessary until the president resigns.
Blaming supporters of a former leader for insecurity in Ivory Coast. The Interior Ministry says allies of Laurent Gbagbo are behind a wave of attacks on prisons and police stations. 35 people, many of them soldiers, have been arrested for being involved in a so-called destabilization project. Laurent Gbagbo refused to accept Alassane Ouattara's victory in a presidential election in 2010, leading to a civil war that killed 3,000 people. Kenya's Election Commission chairman has serious doubts about last month's cancelled election. In a leaked confidential memo from 2 days ago, Wafula Chekubati of the IEBC listed several irregularities, among them the fact that close to 600 polling stations failed or refused to send results for the presidential vote. He also raised questions about the integrity of the technology used during the election. A new poll will be held October 17th. Why do some young people in Africa join violent extremist groups? A UN Development Program report published this Thursday seeks to answer that very question. It's the first study of its kind. The authors interviewed 495 voluntary recruits to organizations like Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram over a 2-year period. Among the aspects of their lives, the authors wanted to know more about their childhood, their views of the state, and their main goals. To talk about the results of the study, our guest is Mohamed Yahya, Regional Program Director, Coordinator with the UNDP. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us on France 24. What is it exactly that incites young people to join these extremist groups?
Well, thank you very much. It seems to be a transformative process that starts from childhood and goes through a series of events. What we are really saying in the report is that there's so many things that happens to individuals before they become conducive to be able to join these organizations. So a lot of work can be done at the early stages before it manifests itself in either joining Boko Haram or Al-Shabaab. Some of the things that are also coming out from the report is that there are triggers that happens in someone's life that pushes people across the line, and such as government action is one of the things that most of the people we interviewed say. That 71% of them say that something specific happened in their life related to government action, such as friends being arrested, someone being killed by security forces. So the report really says that if you apply security in an insensitive manner, you accelerate people joining these organizations.
What about the role of religion in the recruitment process?
So the role of religion in the recruitment process was one of the most surprising things, because if you really look at the global debate on violent extremism, you hear a lot how religion plays a fundamental role. What the research really says is that although religion is cited, more than 51% cite as a reason for joining, but once you ask them their literacy or their understanding of the religion, 57% of them say they know very little of the Islamic religion or none in terms of literacy. So one thing is saying that you are fighting for your religion and understanding your religion. There seems to be a huge gap between those two.
That's interesting. Now, these issues that you're mentioning, the issues of the role of the government, of marginalization, of poverty, these are classic development issues. They have been known for years. Is the development industry failing African youth?
I will not say, obviously, development is number one, it's a priority of governments and people. Development agencies are supposed to support that. What we're actually saying is that in the report, that we are not focusing on where the need is most, borderlands, periphery areas. This is where recruitment is happening. So the report encourages development access to say you have an important role to play in reducing people joining extremist groups, but to do so, you really have to be targeted in where you take this support. And that means focusing on where multidimensional poverty are the highest, and that's exactly where recruitment is happening.
So in the end, is this a security issue foremost or a development issue foremost? I mean, which one should be addressed first?
And I think what we are calling for is both, and they have to be done in a way that is, of course, states have to use security when their citizens' security is threatened, but how you do it matters, is what the report says. And it also tells development actors and people who work in this area that prevention matters, and there's so much to do at the prevention level that we are not doing yet, or we're not allocating the resources that are needed. When somebody joins a terrorist group, it's already too late. There's in the individual transformative processes they go through, which includes low level of education, low level of religious literacy, distrust of institutions, and poor governance. All that plays an important role in making the individual susceptible to the messages these groups sell.
Thank you very much. A very nuanced look there at a very important topic that is unfortunately important all over the world, not just in Africa. Thank you so much, Mohamed Yahya, for joining us here on France 24. Failing to address rape in South Africa. Victims say they feel let down by police in a country where tens of thousands of women say they are sexually assaulted every year. The country's police force is accused of being insensitive and slow in their investigations, with conviction rates at under 10%.
This South African woman was raped by a minibus driver on her way to work. She managed to flag down passers-by and the perpetrator was caught. But her attacker was never convicted, even though her blood was smeared on his vehicle.
Most of the time, radio and television campaigns encourage us to come forward to report rape. But when we come forward, they make us feel guilty for the rape. Sometimes people are discouraged from reporting rape because the police assume the rapist is your boyfriend.
Many South African rape victims feel let down by the police. 150 rape cases are reported every single day, but less than 10% of cases that go to trial end in a guilty verdict.
There's a strong sense of hopelessness. There's this deep frustration, but even hopelessness that is experienced by the victims and their families, because it's almost as if they feel they're fighting the system. They're not only fighting the perpetrator.
Feeling there's nowhere to turn, women are increasingly taking matters into their own hands. Self-defense classes for women are on the rise across the country. As for the police, they recognise that things need to change.
We need to give confidence. We need to respond to the outcries of millions of our people that our police force does not respond adequately to this matter.
In recent years, the South African government has opened 57 specialised sexual offences courts. But perhaps the greatest sign of progress was at a recent rally for women's rights where men were as numerous as women.
Graduating with honors. Staying in South Africa, opposition leader Julius Malema received his bachelor's degree in philosophy from the University of South Africa. The 36-year-old founder of the Economic Freedom Front is one of several recent graduates in his party. This is a big deal in a country where many young black people struggle to get an education because of lack of funds. But as Malema's achievement shows, it's never too late to study.
To hide behind.
That's the end of this edition of Eye on Africa. There's more news coming up on France 24. Do stay with us.